Depressing is one of the only anime that has made me feel completely devoid of hope. Its world is one of constant struggle, not the kind driven by ambition or survival, but the kind that feels automatic, inevitable, like movement without direction, in a sense. A world devoid of the will to move forward in the face of the inevitable, death. And the show doesn't hide this. From the moment you enter this world of gloom and decay, you're fully surrounded by it, not just visually, but emotionally. The darkness isn't something that waits for you later in the story, it's already here. The characters inspire nothing, not hope, not admiration, not even curiosity in a traditional sense. The plot feels distant, almost irrelevant, and the atmosphere remains dull, lifeless, unmoving. It's almost as if Technolize was created to resist being watched, not because it lacks depth, but because it refuses to entertain you in the ways most stories do. And yet, watching it invokes a feeling that I think is necessary to acknowledge, because it doesn't feel good, but it feels honest. So, in this story, I want to sit with that feeling to understand why a story this bleak still feels worth experiencing. Technolize begins by giving us characters we can't easily project ourselves onto. There's no heroic presence to follow, no clear ambition pushing the story forward, and from the start, that creates distance. In most stories, we watch characters grow, we see parts of ourselves in them, and that connection gives us a reason to care. But here, that connection feels deliberately removed. Instead of watching to see how someone like us changes, we watch to see whether this world itself can change, whether it can get better. And as the story continues, that question slowly begins to feel less like hope and more like denial. Because Lux, the underground city where the story takes place, doesn't feel like a world in motion. It feels like a world that has already stopped trying. People still move, systems still operate, violence still occurs, but none of this feels purposeful. It feels routine, mechanical, like survival has become an obligation rather than a choice. And that's where the discomfort begins, not in the suffering, or in the stillness. One of the most striking elements in Technolize is its technology. Advanced prosthetics, artificial limbs, and systems capable of replacing failing human bodies. At first glance, this feels like progress, a solution to limitation, a victory over physical decay. But the more you observe this world, the more that progress begins to feel hollow. Because even when death can be delayed, even when bodies can be repaired, something else begins to disappear. Purpose. A world where death can be stopped doesn't necessarily become a better world. Sometimes it becomes a longer one. A prolonged existence without direction, without urgency, without meaning. When survival stops being fragile, life itself begins to lose weight. In Technolize, technology doesn't evaluate humanity, it preserves it. But preservation alone is not the same as living. Another reason Technolize feels so emotionally distant is because the characters rarely strive for something greater. They endure, they react, they survive, but they don't dream. There are no grand ideals guiding their actions, no meaningful visions of a better future. Even conflict feels empty. Faction rises, violence erupts, power shifts hands, but nothing truly changes for them. These characters don't feel like heroes in decline. They feel more like survivors who have forgotten why survival matters. And watching them creates an unusual kind of discomfort. Not fear, not sadness, but numbness to it all. At some point, while watching Technolize, you begin to notice something unsettling. This world isn't collapsing. It already has. Not physically, but emotionally. The systems are still running, of course. The factions are still fighting. People are still surviving, but none of it feels alive. Nothing feels driven by belief. And that's when the real horror begins to reveal itself. Not the violence, not the decay, but the continuation. Because This world doesn't end, it persists over and over and over again. Survival continues even after purpose has disappeared. And that persistence without meaning is what makes Lux feel suffocating. Not because life is fragile, but because it isn't actually. When survival becomes automatic, life stops feeling valuable. And when life loses its value, existence becomes routine, mechanical, and empty. Technology doesn't frighten you with death, it unsettles you with continuation, with the idea that the world can keep moving long after it has lost its reason to. So, why experience something like Technolize at all? Why sit through a story that offers so little comfort and even less reassurance? Well, because sometimes stories aren't meant to give us hope. Sometimes they're meant to reveal what happens when hope disappears. Technology doesn't fail to provide answers, it refuses to fabricate them. It doesn't promise recovery, it doesn't pretend progress is inevitable. Instead, it forces us to sit with a possibility most stories avoid, that survival alone isn't enough. Because if life continues without purpose, then the real question isn't how we live or how long we live, but why.